The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Welcome to the SpotTrack.com podcast. Kevin Sylvester along with Paul Peck and the founder of SpotTrack.com, Mike Giannetti, who is getting as much air as he can get now because he's not going to be able to breathe as more teams get eliminated from the NFL season and all the work that's going to be done there. But we do want to talk about something that leads into the NFL, and that is on the heels of the College Football Championship, which Alabama wins again in dramatic fashion over the Georgia Bulldogs. An incredible football game, at least finish to the football game. But we want to talk about college athletes, the money that we just saw in the college football playoff, the bonuses paid to coaches, and about paying college athletes, which Paul, as someone who calls college football and basketball, this is something you get asked about and talked about all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Because again, there's an outside perception, Mike, that people see all this money being made, the coaches making ridiculous amounts of money, buyouts being thrown around, cash, and everybody looks at the players going, well, they don't see any of it. They don't get any of it. And I understand why there is such an outcry at times over it. I think sometimes people don't see the whole picture, which is these kids are getting a free education, which can be upwards of $200,000 in value. They're getting an opportunity to train themselves for a professional career. So it's not a one-way street here, but I can understand how on the surface it appears to be unfair.
Yeah. And obviously all those points are made often, and this is a discussion that happens, annually this time of year, really. The point that I think needs to be made here, though, is, we're talking about these coaches' bonuses and network deals and things like that for college football that exist in, obviously, other sports as well, professional sports as it is. But there's two elements to the need for a college player to be paid, per se. Number one is the standard of living, right? So you've got plenty of players who don't go to these Power 5 conferences, colleges that essentially, are working off of hundreds of dollars of stipends a year to live, car damage, outside living expenses, all of those things. That's element number one, right? That's college athlete number one that really makes hundreds of dollars, $200 to $300 for the entire year to live off of. Then you've got college athlete number two, and that's the Power 5 conference, the football, basketball player, where you're bleeding millions of dollars away from your name as a brand, right? And that's the element maybe that most people like to focus on. You see these Alabama players, these Ohio State players, these Penn State players annually hit the bowls, annually hit these huge markets. You're seeing merchandise. You're seeing all these various things thrown around with players' numbers and names attached to it. And that's just money that they're not seeing. That's money that the university sees, that the association sees as a whole, that the states see, the individual states that the universities belong to. So I think that there's two sides of it. There's an actual need for players to have a better standard of living while they're getting their free education, which, that sounds silly, but there is a need for that. And there's athlete number two who is just seeing his or her name be blown out into merchandising and branding and seeing absolutely none of that kickback. And yes, that can happen in the professional league, and many times it does translate, but a lot of times it doesn't as well.
The NCAA has been better about increasing things like stipends and food. There was a very famous situation, Connecticut basketball player who complained that he didn't have enough food to eat, which was really erroneous because there's a lot of food available. They get money for that. It depends on how you spend it. You get that stipend, you can spend it on food. You can spend it on going out to the clubs if you choose to want to as a player. So
they serve food at clubs, by the way, Paul.
Well, I know, but every one of these schools has refueling stations and things like that, and training tables. So there are opportunities, and the NCAA has reacted to some of that as well too.
Yeah, and that's recent. That's a 3 or 4 year old court decision called the cost of attendance. And I did some nice reading into this. That's university by university. I mean, there are some universities pumping about $1,500 a player. There are some pumping $5,000 a player.
Right. Well, and that the larger point to Mike is that between a Power 5 and a less than Power 5, there could be $100 million difference in athletic budgets. So all colleges are not equal, and then that thus leads to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So obviously there have been some steps to improve the matter in terms of the standard of living for the player. I think the angle more for that we can focus on though is just the idea of the brand, right? The idea that college football, college basketball, they aren't just academic amateur things anymore, right? I mean, these are legitimate businesses. These are powerful marketing, merchandising, organizations. They've got their own months, in terms of how it works. They're holidays at this point. So, these major players, and, we can talk about how, there's a disparity between, College 1 and College 2 in terms of the budget. But, it's the Yankees discussion in baseball, right?
Sure.
You need your Ohio States and you need your Alabamas in college football because that's what sells TV, that's what sells advertising, that's what sells merchandise. And then from there, though,
rises
where does that money
else.
go? That's right.
Well, see, now I'm glad you brought that up because, at Spotrac.com, you have the cap systems for all the leagues. So if college football, we're talking football because we just had the championship, so that's top of mind. And college basketball, those are the two money generators. Don't kid yourself. Football is the biggest money generator.
Without question.
I mean, it's incredible.
It blows basketball out of the water.
And basketball makes a lot of dough, but college football is king. So we'll talk about college football. If they had a cap system on what the stipends you can give the players, because I still believe there is – they could say, well, that education 4 years is $200,000. No, it's worth more than that because you're giving a person the tools, the knowledge to go out in the workforce, and over a career of a 30-year career, that's going to be worth a couple $1,000,000, you would think, anyways. Perhaps more if they invest it wisely. So for anybody to say it's just $200,000, that's wrong. Economically, just wrong. You're giving them a chance to earn a living and be a valued member of society.
Or train themselves. If you go to Alabama, you are essentially going to try to train yourself for your next career in the NFL. That's part of it as well.
Absolutely. And players sign a letter. They sign on for this stuff. So it's not like they go in, with their eyes closed here. Their eyes are open. There's so much information now, and they know it. And I even think if they could pay, I still think it would work out the way it is where you have, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, these big schools. They would still get all, the top talent. They'd still be playing for the championship, so they generate all the revenue. But if you had a cap system in college sports, whereas, okay, you can only spend X amount on player stipends, and I think it matters. I do think they should get stipends. You could spend X amount, but if you go over that amount, then you pay the luxury tax, if you will, which goes into the system for the other schools, like Akron. It came to mind here, the Akron Zips, so they can bolster their stipends to their players to have some sort of equity across the board.
So a revenue sharing system, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's enough money there.
Guess what? The Power Fives want no part of it.
Well, I will say this. The research that I've done here, the Power Fives aren't against this. They're not against this.
I'm shocked to hear you say that.
Some more than others. I mean, you've got, I believe Texas A&M is starkly against this. I mean, even so much as that cost of attendance we mentioned, they're one of the lowest in the entire country. They're paying like in the $1,500-$1,600 per player in a huge conference. So, they're holding their fort in terms of they really don't want anything to do with this. But there are colleges, there are universities that are conducive to this. I think from what you're saying, it's an easier process for them if you think about it, right?
Yes.
Because if there's a flat rate, let's say there's a minimum salary for 80% of your roster in terms of football or basketball, and then from there you've got an established set of money that you can pump into incentives and bonuses and things like that, essentially giving these superstars the ability to earn money based on production or academics or things like that. Then it's easier, right? You don't have to go into these homes and these families and try to sell them, with a bunch of BS, which is really what's been happening. Let's be honest.
Yeah, you're right. You don't have to pay people under the table anymore because you're going to pay the athlete. And what you're going to pay the athlete is the summer job money.
That's right.
Right? I mean, because they can't work. This is the thing that, and even rowers or tennis players, Paul, they can't work summer jobs. They have to train,
right,
to keep that scholarship, right? It doesn't mean they don't. But it doesn't mean they don't need money for living expenses to buy socks.
I don't know whether the top flight, the number one quarterback in the country, who's deciding between Clemson, Ohio State, Texas A&M, and USC, is making that decision because USC is paying him an extra $500 more than Ohio State.
No,
I don't know that has anything to do with it.
So it doesn't, but it takes all of that out of the equation, right? It puts everything on a level playing field, right? USC and UCLA and Alabama and Oregon and all of them, there's going to be a set number to start with, right? It's no longer so.
But there's always been a
everything else-
reluctance for any of those schools to want to be on a level playing field, and that's where I think you're going to run into problems with this. Again, we're in the middle of a minor controversy about who's the national champion in football, right? UCF completes an undefeated season, and they're putting up a championship banner in their stadium, and people at Alabama are going, get lost, right? However side you fall on it, it's a display of the disparity of what college athletics is there are this group of haves, and then there's there's a lot more have-nots than there are haves. And that's where the NCAA has failed to try to make this more level. But remember who runs the NCAA, the college presidents of the power conferences.
So to your point, I think you're right in saying, I don't think it's going to matter to the SEC or the Big 12 or the Big 10, right? They're still going to get their players. That's not going to change. They're still going to be powerhouses, right? Are they afraid of parity? Is that what you're saying? Because the NCAA has failed in making this a more level playing field in terms of the on-field performance, right? Because there have been teams. We see it every year in basketball, these Cinderella stories, right?
Yeah, there's no interest in including them in the party in most cases.
But why do they have to be a Cinderella story, right? What if they're all making $25,000? Right, and anyone on the team can make an X dollars more to get to the Final Four or the Elite Eight or whatever it's going to be, right? What if how much more of a conversation piece? Look I can tell you flat out, involving money in anything makes it more interesting. I can tell you that, right?
Sure.
I mean, I put anything on Twitter in terms of a guy's pay, and people are interested. That's just how it works, right? And you're seeing it in all the broadcasts. You're seeing it all over everywhere now, right? People want to know how much is somebody's worth or could be worth or is making, or that's just part of it. So adding money to anything is just going to make it more interesting. And if you've got market values and things like that for college players in March Madness, you're just tripling your interest level.
Well, one of the interesting things that college sports has done in the revenue-generating sports, I'll say
football and basketball.
Football and basketball. The coaches are the stars, and they're paid huge money, right? I mean, you look at what Nick Saban, over $11 million. Over $11 million, and his players don't get paid. They get a stipend. That is where the inequity is, and that's where the argument lies in paying the players, because you're paying the coach $11 million. Now, I think the university looks at it as it's a marketing fee, essentially.
It's also advertising a return on investment,
Well, I'm
too.
just saying it's advertising dollars because there's schools on television all the time, the national championship, Alabama. So I don't think anybody ever looks at it that way, but I do anyways. When their team is on TV all the time on CBS, who pays the rights, and Duke keeps getting there for basketball in the tournament, Krzyzewski's worth the cash.
Absolutely. You know what? It always makes me think of one of the great oddities, which is, does anybody, I'm sure people know this, but people know Vanderbilt's in the SEC, don't they? Right? I mean, we think of the SEC, you think Alabama and Georgia and LSU and Auburn. Vanderbilt's in that conference too, considered the greatest. What's the difference in the kind of generating revenue from Vanderbilt to Alabama? And they're in the same Power 5 conference. So I don't know how you solve the disparities of salary. I know the head coach at Vanderbilt is not making what Nick Saban's making because he's not generating what Nick Saban can generate. How you translate that into paying your players, I think, is a problem that there is no solution to.
Is Nick Saban worth $4 million more than every other coach in the country?
Yeah.
Yes.
He is.
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
Just won his 6th national championship.
Right.
Yeah. $4 million more.
So why not? Right. So, I mean, how do you fault Texas?
You think no?
It's tough.
How do you fault Texas A&M for throwing all that money at Jimbo Fisher to revive their program if they think he can be the guy to do it?
I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with paying $10 million for Kevin Sumlin to go away, though, in order to make that contract happen the first. And that's what,
keep in mind, in a lot of cases, the colleges don't even pay that money.
You're
Just
right.
keep that in mind.
You're right.
It's boosters. It's people that literally will say, I want this guy out of here, and I'm willing to help you pay to get him out of here. So just keep that in mind. It's not like it's coming out of the college budget in a lot of cases.
And to your point with the cap, I've read a lot about how the boosters could impact that cap. So the boosters could essentially become a part of revenue that impacts how much a cap can rise or fall in terms of how that works for incentives, for bonuses, for things like that. So you could use the popularity and the financial prowess of your university to bring in better players. So Vanderbilt, if they could up their boosters, could eventually get a quarterback.
But they
that's
don't even
worth
have
something.
to, because they just rake in all this money from riding the coattails
being
of
in the
everybody
SEC.
else in the SEC.
That's right.
I mean, Vanderbilt doesn't draw anything in the city of Nashville. I know people that live there that tell me that. But you would say, well, why wouldn't they get out of the SEC where they could be more competitive? Because they're more than content to ride the coattails of everybody else.
But wouldn't Kevin's revenue sharing system demote them? Wouldn't that hurt them?
Probably,
Because
yeah.
they're in the SEC, right?
Sure.
So they'd have to pay just as much as Alabama would.
Right.
Yes. It
Now,
would hurt them.
but where does that come from? Does that come from them, or does it come from the SEC, or does it come from the
No,
NCAA?
that's a different question. That's a different
You know,
question.
if Vanderbilt says we can't, our max athletic budget is $75 million, and you want me to compete with Alabama's, who's $130, you got to help me make that gap up.
I want to go back to the coaches here real quick. This is a fascinating discussion, by the way, and hope you're enjoying it here at the Spot Trek podcast. But when I mentioned Nick Saban, you have a problem with him making $4 million more than any other coach. I don't know, Paul.
I don't.
And I look at these coaches' salaries. I'm numb to them. I'm numb to them now.
Well, when you
I'm
look at-
more troubled when I look at NFL quarterback salaries than I am looking at college coach salaries.
Well, it's easy to be numb to him when ESPN just paid $7 billion for 12 years of the college football playoff. I mean, that's the reality we're living in here.
right, which may turn out to be a mistake with people cutting cords and all that stuff.
Yeah, but the ratings, I think even the early
were
ratings
huge.
for the Alabama game were
Huge.
huge, and they were for the first two games too.
I understand that. I'm just saying I'm numb to these numbers because I know the coaches get paid, and that's it. I guess what would be interesting to see is the assistants, and I know they pay assistants well at Alabama's big conferences, but other
There's
conferences,
coordinators making over $2 million a year in the SEC now.
and there are some head coaches and many head coaches in college football don't even make $1 million.
Correct.
Right, which is
Plenty, yeah.
Right.
So, you want to talk about unfair advantage. It's to keep all these great coaches and coordinators on your staff. Is Nick Saban grinding out X's and O's anymore?
No. And
he's
you know
not.
what? And you know what the other interesting development is, and this is taken from the NFL. I don't know what the numbers are, but Alabama has directors of player personnel, offensive analytics people. They might have 20 coaches, non-on the field coaches, almost like a front office in the NFL, recruiting coordinators, all that kind of stuff, because they have the ability to pay those guys six-figure salaries, and there's no restriction on how many of them they can hire as long as they don't go over the 10 coaches on the field rule the NCAA has.
The amazing thing, you mentioned we were talking about paying coaches to go away, that a booster, right, just be cut a check, or get three of his buddies and they'll cut checks to get rid of somebody.
Right.
That just tells you how much money's in college sports.
It's crazy. I mean, it's being fueled by Twitter too. Let's be honest here, right? I mean, these Twitter arguments start after a couple of losses and things, and that's where the boosters are getting
rid of this
their
guy.
attention from, right?
Yep.
They're seeing all this negativity happen about the university, and they want no part of it. And
Right.
You're right. It's just funny money.
All right, so we're talking about paying people. So if we talk about paying athletes, you've got an interesting point, Mike, that relates to how does it wind up when they go to the pros? Because and I think that the thing you're going to start off with by saying is that some guys might have to take pay cuts.
Yeah, it might not be a reality, but it's a concern for me because the professional leagues, basketball and NFL, essentially have done such a nice job of kind of weaning themselves into a nice rookie wage scale at this point, right? You've got a set structure for football for 4 years. You've got a nice structure for basketball for at least 2 years, where these guys come in. They're on a structured pay level, right? They're sort of being limped into the system a little bit. I mean, baseball's ridiculous with their 6-year system in terms of being paid nothing until you can finally hit free agency. But these bigger sports have done a really nice job of sort of saying, this is what we're worth. It's going to slide forward as the cap slides forward, and we'll go from there. If you start paying these Power 5 conference players based on, for instance, market value, which is a model that I've seen out there, if you start paying,
That's Jay Belis, right?
Jay Belis, right? Yeah. So if you start paying, the Duke player, what his market value is as a freshman at Duke right now, right? That is easily going to be more than what his rookie salary in the NBA is going to be with any team. That's just how the structure of the NBA is right now. So there's a concern to putting a value on a player at age 18 and 19 in a system that makes as much money as college football does, because the money could easily bleed higher than it would in the rookie wage scale of the NBA and the NFL. So if you begin to have a serious discussion about a cap with incentives and bonuses and brand money and all that stuff in college, you're going to have to look at it from a professional standpoint as well, because you're not going to want Ohio State players playing college football on X dollars, then coming into the NFL and taking a pay cut, because where's their level of intensity going to be? You know what I mean? Is that going to be something that they're going to be able to deal with for 3-4 years before they can get a big contract? So the only positive I can see, we talked about how, one of the benefits of current college system is you get an academic scholarship. You get $200,000 or something for college. What a salary cap system in college would do is it would certainly make players stay longer, especially if they're able to play, get bonuses for being an upperclassman, bonuses for academic achievements, 3-4 years down the road. They would stay longer because they're able to make enough money to handle their situation as a college football player. But I worry about the line that crosses from college to professional based on the current system.
Yeah, and one other point, too, about all of this is the money that gets generated by the colleges and the NCAA as a whole fund all of those non-revenue sports. The volleyballs and the field hockey and all those other sports, that's where a lot of that money comes from. And what I think you would not want to destroy, which is funneling all the money into the revenue sports, the ones that we all pay the most attention to, and having all of these sports dropped all over the country and having less opportunities for athletes who don't play football and basketball.
Students are charged an athletic fee to
at
schools.
Most schools,
at
correct.
most schools, and that's where they derive their budget from.
Not all. I mean, the big time schools that make a lot of money. Let's be honest. The Big Ten Network money that Ohio State brings in funds their volleyball, hockey, and softball teams.
I think if they paid market value, then I think the student, the athlete, if their market value is higher than their scholarship, they should have to pay for their tuition.
Well, one of the things I've read, and I think I agree with, is there'd be less scholarships. Right, because there shouldn't be a need for a scholarship if a player is valued at a certain level. So you could replace the scholarship because of a paycheck.
Yeah, if you're T.J. Barrett and you're the starting quarterback at Ohio State and your market value is $2 million, let's say, you should pay your tuition.
Yeah, well, how do you figure out what market value is? And then the other unsaid thing
you have Mike Giannetti do it from SpotTrack.com.
The other unsaid thing in all this is if you're going to pay the athletes, they're going to become employees now. And then that opens up tax implications, benefit implications. They're going to be employees of the university. They're no longer going to be students exempt from a lot of that stuff. Is that a road that everybody wants to go down?
Well, you get to also hire HR administrators for each team, so you just created more jobs too, Paul. So
that's right,
and pay more taxes than the deficit in the country. So this is a fascinating thing. I think Mike, you should put up you're gonna put a valuation on every college player.
Yeah, come back in 2020.
There you go.
No, it's a fascinating discussion, and it's a debate that I think that will continue on here. And we touched on so many points. We could probably go on for 3 hours, but we will not because we have more things to get to.
Today's Cap Fact.
All right, Mike, I know one of your favorite times of the year at SpotTrack.com is the baseball offseason because it always generates a lot of discussion and changes the face of baseball salaries, but what the heck's going on this year? We got nothing.
Yeah, it appears that I'm ready for baseball, but the actual teams aren't ready because, training camp starts in about 35 days, preseason, and really, outside of maybe a couple of decent names, none of the free agents have signed a contract yet. We've got 39 guys signed on SpotTrack at a total of $550 million, which seems ridiculously a lot. But when you break it down, you're talking $7.5 million, per year for these players.
Backup infielder money.
Yeah, that's right. That's depth players. So none of the major players have signed. Really, they haven't even been rumored even to be close to signing.
Why do you think?
I think we finally hit a breaking point. I think we finally hit a point where teams are waiting themselves out and they're just letting these prices drop to a normal rate. We're going to see a flux of signings probably early February when push comes to shove here, and they're going to be at or below the market values that you see on SpotTrack and a couple other places around the internet here. So I think teams have finally said we don't need to rush. We don't need to be the first team through the gate with the major signing, and the numbers are going to drop heavily because of it.
So you're saying the hot stove got put out by the bomb cyclone?
I don't know what they're talking about these days because there's not much.
The stove is in preheat mode.
Yeah, they're still talking about last season, maybe.
It's waiting for Trump to put that resurgence in coal, I guess, or whatever. No, I'm saying, listen, come on. I just went for the one-liner. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. I thought it was a good line, Paul. So stop looking at me.
It was.
That way.
I'm not looking at you.
All right. So what we expect early February.
It's got to be coming soon. But yeah, I expect the numbers to be a lot less than anticipated based on the fact that teams just appear to be waiting each other out here.
All right. And you can check out the baseball numbers again at SpotTrack.com.
Time now for the contract of the week.
Our contract of the week is coming out of the Monday Night Football booth, not staying in the Monday Night Football booth. Mike, it's leaving to go back to the sidelines, says you can't go home again. Jon Gruden to the Raiders.
Yeah, so much has been said about Jon Gruden's 10-year, $100 million contract with the Oakland Raiders. But I just wanted to take a little piece to kind of break down the structure, talk a little bit about the numbers in terms of what I've heard. I've had a couple of league sources talk to me about it a little bit just to give me some precursor. And really what I'm hearing is it's been mentioned it's a backloaded deal, and there's a couple of reasons for that. But really what I'm hearing is it's a 5-year, $25 million deal, essentially. So it
sounds about right.
It's that backloaded.
Yeah.
We're talking $75 million on the back half of this thing. So that's a couple of reasons. Number one is, obviously, the move to Vegas changes the tax structure a lot. So while he's in Oakland for these next 2, maybe 3 years, he's going to be hit with a 13% income tax. California's the highest, which we've talked about here on the podcast. But moving to Nevada takes you down to zero. So, the chance for him to make more money in 2020 and on is going to be obviously way easier for him. The second reason is, like all NFL contracts, 10 years and $100 million is never going to be 10 years and $100 million. Nope. It's just not how it works, right? I mean, there's a guaranteed portion.
There's about 2% chance he'd actually be coaching the Raiders 10 years from now.
There's a practical number to this, right? And I'm not here to tell you what it is. I don't know how things are going to work out in the next 3 years for Gruden and the Raiders, but the 5-year, $25 million sounds about right to me. That sounds about a realistic,
$5 million a year is about the right point for a high-level NFL coach.
It's right in the middle, maybe a little higher than the average. I mean, you're talking Belichick's at about 7.5. A couple of guys are over 8 now. So, you're looking at a number that's a lot more tenable when you see the structure of it, and it makes a lot of sense. Look, if Jon Gruden's still a coach 6 years down the road, something's gone really well for the Raiders, right? I mean, let's be honest. He's got a 3-year leash like any other coach, most likely here. So if he's coaching at 6 years and he's making what could be
Tell you why he's got a 4-year leash, Mike, because he did something very interesting. He demanded that all of his assistant coaches get 4-year contracts, which means 2 years in Oakland and 2 years in Vegas. That's longer than most assistant coach contracts in the NFL, and that was predicated by the move to Vegas to make sure that the transition has some stability. And I wouldn't be surprised if Gruden, gave up a little bit of money in order to guarantee that his coaches could get paid the way he wants them to.
So while I'll give you that the 4-year structure is very nice, I don't buy it.
No.
I think based on everything we've talked about, any coach can be gone at any time here. So, these owners are playing with funny money just like college football. So it really just, a point here to make is it's not $100 million. It's not really 10 years. It's heavily, heavily backloaded. And he's going to have, a chance to make as little as much as he can in that Raiders uniform.
Well, there's got to be a buyout number on it that doesn't pay the whole thing. You say it's backloaded. Yeah, why would Jon Gruden leave the booth that pays him more than it be on the sideline?
Isn't he taking a pay cut?
He's taking a pay cut.
So he made $6.5 million at ESPN these last couple of years. So yeah, essentially over the next couple of years, this $5 million per year is a pay cut. I think there's certainly a guaranteed point in terms of how long this is. I wasn't able to lock down that structure in terms of the sources that I was talking to, but I wouldn't say $100 million is even close to the guaranteed number in terms of how this is structured.
No, it wouldn't be. No, they're not going to pay him $100 million no matter what. If he coaches 10 years there, which I agree with you, that's unless he has a Derek Carr Belichick relationship, Belichick Brady thing with Derek Carr. Which after this season,
it's the NFL. No one other than Bill Belichick lasts that long in any one place, so it won't happen.
It's going to be fascinating to see what he does with the Raiders. It should be great. All right, a lot of details with that. It's going to be a busy offseason in the NFL, as Mike mentioned earlier. Baseball will be heating up here in a few weeks after just being ice cold right now there, and fascinating discussion that we're probably going to have once we stop recording here to continue on the college sports and paying the athletes. All the information at SpotTrack.com. For Mike Giannetti, Paul Peck, I'm Kevin Sylvain.